I am so delighted to welcome on to the First Time Facilitator podcast, Douglas Ferguson. Douglas, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks for having me. It's great to chat, and I'm just looking forward to spending a little time together this afternoon.
Yeah, I love spending time with fellow facilitators, fellow podcasters, and you do so much content in terms of the video work that you do. If you are watching us on YouTube, you'll see the amazing setup that Douglas has actually. And Douglas, you mentioned that you have lived in Sydney for 6 months. I want to start with finding the world of facilitation, because no one really, as a kid thinks, when I grow up, I want to be a facilitator. I want to run these group events. So can you tell us a bit about your story? I mean, you obviously started in another field, how you discovered this world.
Yeah, well, it's funny you say that. I think I'm on episode 140 of my podcast, and I only interviewed one person that knew they wanted to be a facilitator as a child, but their parents were basically facilitators. So they were like continuing the family tradition. Wow, I didn't really have the realization that facilitation was my path until I started voltage control. Yet I was doing it the entire time. So if we go back to the time I was there in Sydney and traveling around Australia, I was writing software at the time. And once I moved back to the States and headed to Austin, is when I started to work with bigger software teams, founded a few startups along the way. And I was always really curious about what made for highly functioning, highly collaborative teams. And so it's that quest of collaboration and how we worked best together that led me to facilitation techniques and different tools to unlock this kind of better meetings and better creativity. And whether it was extreme programming, Scrum, Agile, Lean, you name it, I was super curious about it all. And really what brought everything to a head was when I was running a product and engineering for a startup called Twyla. And I had brought in design sprints because I was really interested in that as a technique at the time. Then Google Ventures invested in the company. So I got to turn that kind of pen pal relationship I had with Jake into an in-person relationship. And I think that was a real pivotal moment. And as I left that startup, just started to get out more in the world doing events with Jake and started realizing, wait a second, this is kind of a trend that I've had throughout my career, and had this epiphany that I can do this for a living. I can build a company around this. I can help others realize the importance of this. And that's what led me to this place today.
Very cool. Very cool. I mean, there's so much to unpack in terms of your career history and those, wasn't it Steve Jobs that said we can connect the dots looking backwards, but it's hard to forecast that as well. It's an interesting, what I want to ask you is this word facilitation, right? I think a lot of people have different interpretations of what that means, but we all want the same thing. We want our meetings to be effective. We want to collaborate. But the word facilitation sometimes can seem a bit disjointed. When I work with leaders, they don't wake up in the morning thinking, I need to be a better facilitator. They wake up thinking, I want to hear voices from the people in my groups. Can I ask you that question? Like, you were doing this work, you've mentioned words like collaboration, working with groups, but you haven't used the word facilitator. What do you think about that? Like, I'm just curious around just the language we use and associate with these sessions.
Yeah, it is a title that many don't feel drawn to, or they don't identify as a facilitator, yet they are facilitating. And our book, Magical Meetings, one of the things we say is there's no such thing as bad meetings, just bad facilitators. So even if you don't have a title of facilitator, or you don't identify or call yourself a facilitator, you are probably facilitating at some point. And that's across all companies, most roles. And it's especially so when you look at these boundary spanning roles, right? These roles, these cross-functional roles that exist to help bust the silos and whatnot. And I think that it is an interesting phenomenon, and it's a shame because the rhetoric around the role of facilitator can be somewhat alienating, I guess. If folks don't associate with the term, then they're not going to seek out the help or realize it's for them. And I basically have come to the conclusion that it's just good leadership. It is modern leadership is what it is.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah, modern leadership. I agree. I agree. It's a crucial skill. I'm so grateful that we've kind of, it's almost like a superpower. Like we use it in every scenario. Sometimes, even with my husband planning a holiday, I'll start, trying to use some type of model. He's like, don't facilitate on me. Now, you've been doing this for quite a few years now. I'm curious, do you still get those sort of pre-workshop nerves, or like how do you feel about, let's say you're hosting a session next week, there's a group of people that are flying in for it. How's Douglas feeling before that?
I think I don't really get the nervous stuff as much. I mean, I used to get quite a lot of stage fright, which is really fascinating because I was a musician, from early. My mother was a piano player and kind of got bit by that bug and toured around Europe and things. And the first time I had to stand up in front of a group of people and try and educate them, I did a lot of one-on-one mentoring, but educating a big group of strangers. It was one thing to like stand up in front of my team at my company and help them through a problem. But I remember I was walking into a classroom at St. Edward's University, and they had asked me to speak to the students about how to think about preparing themselves for the workforce. Like, what are the things we don't learn in school? And I remember my heart's like felt like it was going to leap out of my chest, kind of thing, And so that kind of stuff doesn't really happen anymore. Or if I do get a reaction, it's a little milder. It's maybe my palms get a little bit sweaty, and I've learned to harness it as a source of inspiration, because it means that I'm entering into a space that is special and really important. And that if I honor that excitement and not let it turn into some fear and dread. The other thing that I think is super important to keep in mind is like, the thoughts can always run through the mind of, these people probably think I'm ridiculous, or like, they're laughing or whatever. And the thing that is so important to remember is, when have you ever sat in an audience and thought to yourself, I hope that person messes up? It's like, no, you're generally rooting for people. And it's why Curb Your Enthusiasm is so awkward and cringy, because you want him to stop, you don't want him to continue messing up. So I think, practice makes practice is something we like to talk about here at Voltage Control. And so the more you actually put the effort and the moves in, the more comfortable it becomes, the more fluid it is. And I would say there's a curse to that. There's the curse of knowledge, right? So you can kind of be fueled by this like anxiety or this concern of this fear of failure. Whereas once you get into that zone of comfort, it's much easier to just do what is easy and do what versus like cracking open a book and finding a new method you've never seen before. And so I always challenge myself to kind of tap into those early feelings that get past the comfort and maybe try to force myself to do things a little differently.
So interesting. A really good point around that, because you're right about, there's certain activities I know that I have that I can rely on that are comfortable. At the same time, I have this, I don't know if it's this urge, but I always feel like I have to like continuously improve and tweak a workshop, even though it's the first time for this new group. They've never seen it before. For me, I will personally get bored if I'm having to run the same thing over and over again. So at one point I'm like, Leanne, just relax and just do the same thing. At the other end, I'm like, no, keep growing and keep challenging what it's like. Do you find that as well? Like, how do you navigate? I know you run certain programs. When you deliver them over and over again, do you try different things? Like, how do you navigate that?
Well, I'll throw this back at you. There's an awesome tool called Integrated Autonomy. Have you heard of it?
No, tell me more about it.
So Integrated Autonomy comes from the Liberating Structures repertoire. And the idea is that the name comes from the most common use case for the tool, which is an organization wants to be both integrated and both autonomous. They have desires to be both, right? And you think that's a wicked problem. Like it's paradoxical. How can you be both? Well, it turns out you can be both. It just means that you're showing up differently at different times in different ways. And so you can actually take that problem that you just described and do an integrated autonomy on yourself. So you can say, how can I be systematic or productized? How can I repeat so that I have some efficiency over this repetition? Or how can I standardize? And then at the same time, how can I be original? So, and the way it works is just like with integrated autonomy, you'd say, what would we do if we're trying to be integrated? All right, now let's go look and say, what would we do if we're trying to be autonomous? And then we'd look at those two lists and we'd say, what's similar about these two lists? Or what things do we have to do regardless? What are things that are like, undeniably, these are important? And so similarly, if you're saying that I want to standardize, I want to be original, I want to be fresh and new, you can kind of substitute those out and kind of explore.
Yeah.
So it's really, really handy and fun.
Very two powerful questions. And it kind of reminds me of something because I guess my thing is I want to make every workshop like a once in a lifetime workshop. But then you think every workshop is once in a lifetime because you've got different groups, different people, different energy. It's all once in a lifetime. So that really links into that nice integrated autonomy framework. And I'm going to have to look at that. Thanks so much, Douglas. So in terms of, I guess, your personal preparation, in terms of design, like where do you get your inspiration for that? You've just shared a few liberating structures. You know a ton of tools. I guess the challenge is like, which one do you pick? How do you navigate and solve for that?
Yeah, like I was saying earlier, it's definitely, I have some moves. It's sort of like, being the football team that, and I'll leave it up to our listeners to decide what kind of football we're talking about. But, and you got your plays that you might do often and it gets comfortable. And, I've got a big library behind me, and sometimes I'll just grab a book and I'll flip through it. And one thing that happens with practice is you start to get a sense, a feeling about things, whether it will work or not. As long as we are being conscious of our attendees are showing up, how we anticipate they'll show up, how we want them to leave, and then also understanding the purpose by which we're united, why we're coming together. If we keep all those things in mind as we're kind of looking through these sources of inspiration, then, you'll end up with having too many things versus feeling like you're at a glut of activities or methods, right? And I think that's the biggest challenge I see with new facilitators is trying to jam too much stuff into the agenda, which is like people always come to us and say, we want to learn more tools. And my take is that, well, the tools are easy. Let's focus on the principles and the fundamentals and the how and the general frameworks. And then you can go out and find tools all day. If we don't understand these moves around how much is too much to cram in. These kinds of things are super important to focus on.
Yeah, I always reflect on, this podcast is called First Time Facilitator, looking at my run sheets from 7 years ago, as opposed to now where it was like 11, 12, say this, show that, 11, 14, I don't know, and now of course it's like a one pager, like just a few bullet points and, maybe 3 tools in there. Have you, how, I guess you're no longer a first time facilitator, but when you reflect on Douglas starting out in those startups and in software, what has shifted for you?
Well, when I think about, my journey was interesting because I wasn't putting myself out there for hire. I didn't have that title facilitator, but I was definitely facilitating these groups of engineers and designers and product managers and support representatives, these folks that were collaborating to build software and to make value for the company. And so for me, it was pretty low. It was high stakes for the company, but kind of low stakes for me because this is my team. And I found something cool. I'm just going to bring it in and say, hey, we're going to do this. And I was the boss. So it wasn't like someone was staring at me like, we don't mess this up, And so I was kind of very lucky and privileged in that regard. Right. And, but I will say that when I decided to start doing this stuff for clients, there was a bit of a shift there because it's like, oh, weird. Now I'm being judged, or now there's this performance that I have to rehearse for. And so certainly, I was printing out my agenda and looking over it in high detail and thinking about, what comes after this and wow, how does this tee it up and this is right. It's another thing that I kind of fell in love with doing was making lots of versions of the agenda so that no matter what happened, I was kind of prepared. because in my head I would think, oh, well, this is another way to do it. And so I just sketch out all these different versions. And I think also another thing that is kind of rare about me
Mm.
is as a musician, I really gravitated toward improv. And so certainly was in a few bands where we, wrote music and performed songs, but also did quite a bit of free improv. And so I was very accustomed to getting in front of an audience with some general concepts, with a direction in mind, and finding our way there. And so this notion of an emergent truth, where we're going to kind of go through some self-discovery together, was already in my DNA because of those experiences there. So that's kind of unique. I don't know how helpful that is for folks that might be listening without those experiences, but certainly I think that I benefited from that.
I think it's helpful because I guess my example is that I've graduated to that, but I didn't have that musician background. But it's almost like a choose your own adventure book. And even sometimes more recently, I've been having agendas where it's not a linear agenda. It's like, here are 5 tools I could bring in. I don't know when I'll use them, but you can sort of, again, like you said, just pay attention to what's going on in the room. Hey, so I've got this Facebook group called the Flip Chart. And it hasn't been as common now, but like in the last few years, like every month, someone's asking a question like, do you define yourself as a facilitator or a trainer? Like this continuum of, are you there to like hear the voices and be unbiased, or are you coming in with an opinion? Where do you sit on that continuum? Do you think there's a continuum? Like it just keeps popping up as a question.
Yeah, it's interesting because I find there are a lot of people that call themselves facilitators or who are enamored with facilitation as a craft, and they are trainers, they're educators, and that's the lens by which they view facilitation. And if you Google facilitator and you find these people, they're not going to really know much about like dotmocracy or different decision making. They might if they've educated themselves on such matters, but a lot of them don't, and they're in these kind of like educational space, and they are, and even related to the wraparound facilitators. And I think if you really look at the origin of the word facilitator, the Latin root is facili, which is to make easy. And so no matter where we're looking, facilitators are there to guide, to coach, to make things easier, not to do it. We're not the sage on the stage, we're the guide on the side. And I think you can do that as a trainer, as an instructor. You can take a facilitated approach. You can be a leader who takes a facilitated approach. Design thinking is a very popular toolkit and methodology that leverages facilitators in workshops. But it's not, we aren't limited to those little silos when we think about facilitation. I think anyone can show up and allow the gathering of humans to be more positive, more effective. There's a lens around facilitation that I really like, which is we're there to create an imaginary world.
Ooh.
To allow people to function and behave in ways that they don't normally function. So if you think about it in that way, facilitators are a form of change agent because people are hungry for change. They have some future state in mind that they're aspiring to, and a facilitator can help you get there, much like a river raft guide, right? The river raft guide's not going to take you down this river. Everyone has to participate, because if people aren't all actively working toward the progress of the goal, the guide can't make it happen. Also, that guide has never seen what's happening exactly now in this river, because this river is unfolding in a way that's unknowable and you can't anticipate. Now, they probably went down a few rivers before in their day, and they kind of know some of the things to know about, but it's unfolding in a way that we just have to respond to, and they are going to help everyone respond in a way that gets us to the end, to the destination.
Yeah, I really like that metaphor that you shared of that, the river, like, and the rafting, and also the accountability of the people, to actually get in and row as well.
Yes, exactly, because they don't.
And I think, because sometimes when maybe I've reflected on a workshop, I'm like, oh, it could have gone better, and I didn't do this, and it's all on, I place a lot of the blame on me, as opposed to maybe I didn't do something in the prep to get people involved, or even the accountability is actually on the people that are showing up. And I think, I don't know, sometimes in my community, we've got people that are saying, yeah, it's all on me, I let the people down. But just a reminder that it is a joint accountability as well. Do you find that with the people in your community, Douglas, that you put a lot of pressure on ourselves as opposed to it being a shared responsibility?
It's interesting when you say in the community, because I think we as a facilitation academy work hard to help people understand how to take this perspective into facilitation. But whenever people show up, new folks or new people in the community, it's definitely very common to have this belief that it's on me to make this happen. In fact, that's why I named the podcast and the conference Control the Room. It's a bit facetious because anyone who comes in and tries to, quote, control the room is going to fail miserably. But if you do not make any effort to control the situation and to acknowledge what's happening and create the conditions that need to happen. I mean, even showing up with an agenda, even walking in the room, you're exerting some level of control. It's a loose control, but it's there. And I think it's that dynamic of realizing your importance of being there. How do you ease back at the right time? What's that kind of subtle calculus that you might use?
Yeah, it's that subtle calculus as well. I think I'm curious around back to drawing on because you said when you were a musician, you weren't really that anxious before a performance. Do you think it's because, and you did mention there's some improv in the music that you play, but is it because it was more of a performance as opposed to it being like a conversation where you have to have that sort of internal calculus and you're not too sure whether you're on or not? Like, what was the difference between those two scenarios?
Well, I think that there's a few things. It's change of space and change of perspective can shift everything, right? And that's actually a powerful tool as a facilitator, right? If people are stuck, just like rip all of the flip charts down and put new ones up, right? For me specifically, when I go back to the thinking about being a musician in those days, I could hide behind my guitar. I could hide behind this persona, the way I was dressed. I had bandmates. We had songs, we had plans that was a scaffolding. We also rehearsed a lot. And so we knew what we were doing. And of course, the first time ever I played live, sure, there were jitters and stuff. The first time I played as a solo act, because I was much older by the time I decided to first go out and do my own solo show. That was, quite frightening. And then when I would change instruments, when I went from, after playing guitar for a number of years solo, I did a performance behind my modular synthesizer. That was a change that created some new concerns and fears. But then over time, I saw enough variety where anything, even new things, were just like, okay, yeah, no big deal. And so I think similarly, the improvisational aspects of the music kind of set me up for being very fluid in these environments and okay with the emergence. But certainly the newness of it, there was some comfort that I had to establish with having these people have these expectations of me and get past the uncertainty in my own mind that, can I do this, right? Am I going to be successful here?
Have you had a specific scenario that stands out for you where something has emerged and you're like, I don't know what to do with this?
Wow. Yes. And my typical go-to, it happens all the time. It still happens. I don't have all the answers, and don't protest to have all the answers. And I love to ask the group. One of my favorite questions to ask when I don't know what's going on or I don't know how I think the group should respond, or where I think it might make sense to nudge or shift us, I might simply say, what does everyone think just happened? Right? Let's unpack it right now together. And that can be, a variance of that can be especially powerful if things get dramatic in emotional or even physical ways, right? In fact, it can be really helpful to ask the group if they think we should take a break. And then sometimes it might be best just to say, we should take a break. And when we get back, we'll talk about how we want to proceed, especially if things get really tense, because there isn't a right way to address that. I think everyone will generally need to have some distance from it to have an actual, good conversation.
Yeah, that's really great. And Douglas, by the way, and if you're watching on YouTube, you'll see me like taking all these notes and sound bites. Some really great questions and quotes that have emerged from this conversation. I don't know about you. I mean, you've worked in software. I'm pretty excited. Also, like, you know, with AI and what is happening. I just sent out an email this morning about an AI photo shoot that I went on, and the images were actually pretty good. It actually looked better as my AI persona. Yeah, but you know, there's programs out there now where you can basically write the topic of your session into a prompt, and you'll create a slide deck, a workshop outline, and everything else. What trends are you noticing in AI? Have you sort of had a play in this space as well?
Yeah, in fact, we just held our facilitation lab the week before last. We kind of mix up the frequency. Now we're doing them every other week. We'll probably go back to once a week at some point, but we did it on facilitating with AI and just invited a community dialogue around, you know, what anxieties everyone might have, where they're stuck, where they're curious, what they've tried so far. And, you know, this is something, especially as a technologist and software person, have been following this very closely with lots of curiosity and interest. And, you know, I've been waiting for this moment because I have known for a while now that we've been on the cusp, a breakthrough or a moment like this, because I'm on an advisory board of a group called Kung Fu.ai, and they're an AI consultancy. And being aware of the types of things that they're capable of and kind of keeping my finger on the pulse of where things are headed, I got to say, I did not know, you know, weeks before ChatGPT was launched, I had no idea they were about to launch it. You know, that was a surprise to me. But at the same time, I was like, okay, I was ready for this to happen at any moment. And just watching their advancements, like seeing just the growth from GPT 3.5 to 4.0, going from 10% tile on the bar exam to 90th percentile. And, you know, I think a lot of people don't realize this yet, because if you're using ChatGPT and you haven't subscribed to ChatGPT Plus, you can't actually force it to use GPT-4. And I have played around with sending prompts to 3.5 versus 4.0, and it is remarkably different. And specifically, if you're asking it to do things that require perception and synthesis. So I believe that we're going to see more and more embedded synthesis into our tools. Muro's already announced an AI capability, and I signed up for the beta for it. Mural, FigJam, all these products will have it built in, because the thing is the API layers are very easy to plug into. You don't really have to write much code as a Mural or Muro or whoever to like make this functionality work. And we're going to be able to do some phenomenal things. Like during the workshop, to be able to say, okay, it's like synthesize this stuff, and then have the group immediately react to how the system just synthesized. Do they hate it?
Yeah.
Are they pissed off? Are they excited? Do they see some opportunity? Think about how that will fuel so much of this dynamicism together. We can lean into that. Also, like there's going to be lots and lots of capabilities that where we don't even realize, we take it for granted that it's hard work and it's stuff we had to do. It's brain work. We don't even think of it as throwaway stuff that is going to start replacing for us.
Yeah.
And the more we allow that to happen, the more we can start to realize what it really means to be human. And if we're really leaning into what it means to be human, we can lean more deeply into what it means to facilitate and bring people together. What's the psychology of connection and relating, et cetera? And we're going to see some really profound moments as people start to collaborate at levels that we've never imagined.
Wow, that's incredible. I mean, thank you for opening my awareness. Every day I just hop on and I'm watching, going on Twitter and YouTube and just trying to keep up to date and just, again, try and think about the impact on our profession. When I see these tools, like I saw someone, like a former Meta data scientist, she got ChatGPT-4 to write her a study plan to learn how to code. So I think if we go back to that continuum of like training, facilitating, I think trainers, that whole thing might become obsolete in terms of learning, because what it can create for you is pretty remarkable. In terms of facilitation, though, and that deep connection and connecting as humans, I think that part will be even more important. So interesting times.
Yeah, I agree. And here's the thing. I think that like things like the type of training you would get from a Khan Academy or learn a specific skill to do a thing. Some of those skills, we won't even need to know them anymore.
Yeah.
So there's that.
Yeah.
But I certainly agree when that type of like direct knowledge transfer is going to be either irrelevant or much easier to get through a system like that. We're also going to see the birth of basically chat UI. And it's already kind of shown up in Chat GPT, but it's only beta access for their plugins right now. But with their plugins, you can just type in and say, because there's an open table plugin, for instance. And so you can say, you travel to Melbourne to do a workshop and you're in a neighborhood in Melbourne you haven't been before, you're in a rush, you got there kind of late, you want to find some Thai food really fast. And you say, I'm at blah, 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 blah hotel. What's the closest Thai restaurant to me? It goes out to open table, comes back. Maybe you give it some other instructions, whatever, but you don't have to sift through their UI and this and that, and it immediately gives you the answer. And I think we'll see that people add these capabilities onto their services and products. And that way you can just give it real open kind of dialogue-based request, and it'll just do those things. And that's, I mean, I think we'll start seeing more and more of that by the end of the year.
Yeah.
And it's going to happen. I see it happening pretty rapidly. And I think facilitation has a real opportunity here because the training, the capability building, what people are going to lean into are in-person gatherings, moments of connection. Yeah. And, how we do that, how we design for that is where we will see a lot of interest and a big opportunity.
That's great, because I really love getting on planes and running sessions in person. It's one of my reasons why I sort of picked this profession. I mean, even things, I was reading an article yesterday about just even the AI voice, right? So I'm thinking in 12 months, I could write an article about facilitation and just get my AI voice person to voice it for the podcast. I won't do that, but it would be a fun experiment. And just...
I will say this.
Tell me.
These tools that are out there that will allow you to record a snippet of your voice and then basically create a model of you, and you can, type out a script and it'll say it out. I would say this is a warning to all listeners. If you're considering a tool like that, I would make sure to research who's behind the tool, because that is a really popular way of defrauding people of money, because they will basically make phone calls and to your loved ones, and it's basically you in distress begging for money, and so it sounds like you're being held hostage, but it's actually just an AI of your voice. So you definitely don't want to like have your voice modeled on systems that you're unaware of. So just something to be aware of.
Yeah, I read an article about that actually on the weekend, and that was suggesting like if you work internally, just hang up, call the person back, and just verify it's them.
Yes.
But I was freaking out because I'm like, I've got 200 podcast episodes. Anyone can just grab my voice.
Right.
You know what I mean? Were you thinking the same?
Yeah, I think that the trick is to have a safe word so your family knows that it's you. Yeah.
That's great. Yeah, good idea. Hey, Douglas, do you have a favorite icebreaker or energizer that you like to sort of kick off a session with, or bring back?
Oh wow! I'm really particular about icebreakers because I was the victim of a number of icebreakers and sessions through the years where people just did them because they thought, oh, this would be cool to do. And like, we'll just create some connection here in this meeting. And it felt so performative and trite. And so I have a belief that this stuff is important and we should be very mindful about what and when and why. And so I would just say this: if anything we do as facilitators, if we can't stop and look at the group and say, why don't we just do that? and have it erupt into a pithy conversation, we as facilitators should stop and think really intently on, why did I just do that? And so for me, it's really about what we're doing in the session and what's going to tee folks up for what I'm about to ask of them. So for instance, if I want them to engage in really playful, curious, generative stuff, I might have do an activity that involves like creating lots of stuff where quantity matters versus quality. So I'm trying to think about what is the little lesson that I want to, or how do I want to prime them? What kind of behavior do I want to elicit so that then I can tee it into the next thing? And so I try not to just have try not to have go-to icebreakers, and instead, what can I do to ensure that we're teeing them up properly? I will say though, impromptu networking is a super great way to build some connection. I love to use it as a soft opener. So when people are coming in, but I'm thinking the beautiful thing about that activity is a structure, right? Like the real genius is when you craft the right prompt, right? And so I'm always thinking intently around, like, I don't want to, sure, I can tell people to talk and they're going to have fun, but how do I ask the right question so that when their conversations are going to be really, really good? And then when we do the debrief after, it's going to kind of set us up to get us rolling.
100%. Yeah. Begin with the end in mind, I think it's very smart. And I'm the same as you. If there's like just a random icebreaker that doesn't connect to anything, I love workshops and I love talking to people, but I am a skeptic there. And it's like, especially because you got limited time together, you need to, sort of frame it, prime it for where the direction you want to head into.
What's your favorite ice cream flavor?
Yeah, I know. Unless there's something like psychoanalytical about the strawberry, then yeah. Hey, you do a lot of great work with facilitators. I'm sure a lot of the people listening to this episode will be curious around how you can support them with getting better at their craft and building their business as well. Where can we send them? What do you offer? Let us know.
Yeah. So Voltage Control is a facilitation academy, and they can find us at voltagecontrol.com. Lots of information there, including free resources. So lots of templates for Mural and Miro and PDF as well, and some guides and tools and things there. And we have a community. There's a Slack group, and we do a facilitation lab where we bring people together to try stuff out. That's all free. And then, of course, we're doing workshops in our flagship facilitation certification as well. So you have to join us. I also do a podcast, and Leanne, you'll be on there. We'll be promoting your book that's coming up. So, lots of ways to engage and have a conversation. People can find me on LinkedIn too. Happy to connect and talk. Excellent. We'll throw everything that Douglas mentioned in the show notes for this episode. So check out all the great work that he does. Douglas, I know that we really just jumped from topic to topic here, covered a wide variety of things relating to your music career, software, the direction of facilitation and AI as well. So thank you so much for being a guest on the show. Great to connect with you. Absolutely. Thanks for having me. It was a pleasure getting to chat today.